Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, John from MS Pearce. This is a US election aftermath special with my look on what's happened in the US elections, why the Democrats lost, and they lost big. And the main reason really that it took place. And it's the reason that underwrites so many of these other reasons and rationale that people are presently given. We're in the blame game phase of post-election analysis. The US wasn't ready for a woman of colour. They chose the wrong vice presidential nominee. They should have chosen Josh Shapiro. They chose the wrong presidential nominee. They were too far left. They were too far right. They didn't appeal to men and concentrated too much on toxic masculinity. They didn't concentrate enough on black or white or Asian or Hispanic or old or young or men or women enough. They were too pro-Israel. They were too pro-Palestine. So on and so forth. And so the list goes on. And my thesis is that while all of those, might have played a part, they're all underwritten by something else. And really, if you want to deal with why they lost and put things in place so that they don't lose again, if you're a Democratic strategist, all of that stuff, in my opinion, is froth. And the real stuff you need to deal with is below that. And that's what we're going to look at. So there's absolutely no doubt that they got beat. Here is an infographic that tells you what parts of the nation skewed or shifted towards the Democrats and what shifted more towards the Republicans. And the red arrows is more towards the Republicans and the blue arrows more towards the Democrats. And what you can see there is that pretty much everywhere. And to be fair, these ones on the left-hand side on the Western Seaboard, probably the results hadn't come through by the time this came out. So I would assume you just carry that on all the way over to the West. It's clear that everywhere there was a shift. Now, the question is whether... I talked about Trump having a hard ceiling, and I was talking about this all the time, and then the reality, as I saw it after the election, is that actually that was a load of rubbish I was telling you, and Trump smashed through that hard ceiling. I'm not 100% sure that's the case, actually, because Trump didn't get any more votes than he got last time. In fact, he got 2 million fewer votes as it stands. And the Democrats got an absolute ton less, fewer votes, 14 million as it stands at the moment. I think this is changing. So here, at the time of someone writing this, they said it's really hard to believe that 19 million Americans just decided not to vote this time. 16 million for Biden, 3 million for Trump. It's shifted a little bit since then. That's produced all these conspiracy theories that they've hidden a load of votes, or there's vote rigging in favour this time of the Republicans. And in fact, it's bizarre to think that all those votes would suddenly disappear. And just to put that to bed, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there's anything particularly in that, although I think there will be fewer votes, and that's something that we do need to talk about. But a multi-million vote gap between 2020 and 2024 fuels false election narratives, says the AP, the Associated Press fact check. So the claim President Joe Biden won approximately 20 million more votes in the 2020 president election than Kamala Harris did in the 2024 race, proving either that Trump had cheated his way to the second term or there was widespread fraud 4 years ago. So you can actually read it that there were more votes previously, and that was a cheating, or there's fewer votes this time, and that was a cheating. My personal opinion is that, first of all, the votes are still being counted, and there's a lot of votes still to be counted. And so, last time it was, a week after, where all the votes were suddenly tallied, or not suddenly, eventually tallied, sorry. This time round, to say, a day after the election, there's all these votes missing, therefore there's cheating, I think is a problem. So you need to wait till all those votes come in. But also, I think, as far as I'm concerned, talking about that hard ceiling, it could well be that Trump didn't burst through that hard ceiling. It's that Kamala Harris just absolutely failed to get on board the number of votes that she and the Democrats needed. And I think there needs to be a really detailed post-mortem about that. but yeah, so that's definitely something to consider. I think, we can look at all this data, but what's interesting, I was thinking that all the money that the Democrats spent on Get Out the Vote, the GOTV, the Get Out the Vote ground game, and they had an amazing ground game, and they had an amazing campaign, is my opinion. Actually, the campaign was pretty flawless with regard to Kamala Harris. Didn't really put a foot wrong. She didn't make any big gaffes. She didn't. The criticisms were, oh, she said the wrong thing in the View interview where she said she didn't differentiate herself. She said, oh, there's nothing I do different from Biden. Everyone's like, oh, you've got Trump going around giving oral sex to a microphone, calling people scum, calling Nancy Pelosi a bitch, talking about the size of Arnold Palmer's schlong. Just an absolute, he was apparently, his campaign at the time where he was doing that Arnold Palmer thing and dancing, that 39-minute dancing bit, apparently his campaign were thinking, we've lost it, this is game over. And it was a bit dire straits because it was the worst campaign ever. But he won, and she didn't. And so it's not about, I don't think, the campaigns. To Get Out the Vote money spent, you could argue that it was an absolute waste of money. They had hundreds of millions of dollars that they pumped into the battleground states, and they still lost, and they still lost quite handily. So you could argue that there's no point spending all that money. I would slightly disagree with that because it's interesting. Here are the battleground states, and you've got Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and this is a shift from Democrat to Republican, and the scale here is 3 and 3 across there. So the biggest one's in Michigan, where you've got that's about a 4.5 percentage point shift to Republicans. Otherwise, it's sort of 1.5, etc., etc. That's where they spent the money. They spent the money there. What's interesting is where you look elsewhere. Now, instead of having a 3 point each side of the zero line here, a 3 point margin each side, so that's 6 point margin, we're going to go down and look at 25 points to the left here and 15 points to the right. So New York, which remained Democrat, shifted almost 15 points. You've got Illinois, that remained Democrat, shifted, 10 points plus. New Jersey, remained Democrat, shifted, likewise, a huge margin, over 10 points, 11 points. So where they spent the money, they stopped the shift from arguably 10 to 15 points down to 1.5 points, 3 points. Right, so that money, although it ultimately didn't change the election at all, it did move a lot of voters from Republican to Democrat, or it mobilized a lot more Democratic votes. So that money wasn't, well, you can argue it was still a waste because it didn't change the election, right? But actually, there was an outcome to that money spent. Which leads me to this you might think it's a controversial opinion. My opinion is that the Democrats were never going to win this election. Kamala Harris did a really good campaign. She hardly put a foot wrong, right? It was Vlad Vexler was talking about this. He said, right, for her ability, she did a 9.5 out of 10 campaign. For who she was, and you can argue she wasn't the right pick, and this and that, and there are better people, etc. But for her, she ran a good campaign, and the campaign was decent. It was organized. It was on point. The speeches were well scripted, etc., etc. You had the comparison to the Trump campaign, which is objectively is an absolute mess. From Madison Square Gardens to rambling on at every single rally, ad infinitum, having bored people leaving early. That happened. Those data points are there. You had 70% people in the rallies at the end of the campaign, as in 30% of the venues were empty. Well, each venue had 30% empty seats. So that is, to me, a sign that this is not about the campaigns. This was something deeper than that. You could have run any Democrat instead of Kamala Harris, as far as I can work out. or any vice president instead of Tim Walz, and the same thing would have happened. This wasn't about the campaign so much as it was about... So in other words, it's not so much about the message, although I'm not saying you couldn't improve the message, and we'll talk about that in a second, but this is about the mechanisms of messaging. You've got rural voters smashing, Trump smashed the rural voters even more. You've got Latino men turning to Trump. You've got women voters not coming out as much for Harris as was expected. You've got young voters not coming out for Harris as much as expected by a long, long margin. What has happened? How have the Democrats lost currency with a load of these demographic segments? And actually, do we need to concentrate on demographic segments, or is this just a problem across the board? And I would say if you had a simple unifying message that was really effective, but more importantly, had the correct megaphones to amplify that message, then you win. In 2019, Boris Johnson won the UK general election, and he won it pretty handily on the back of 3 words: get Brexit done. He didn't have a policy agenda that was worth looking at all. There was no granular detail. Labour come out with this massive policy manifesto, policy-laden manifesto. Got everything in it, all the right kind of stuff. And actually, if you're going to compare the detail of these, you would almost certainly, I would have thought, voted for. Well, I would have. It would be a no-brainer to me to vote for that policy agenda, because, well, at least it's something and it makes sense as much as, there's detail, there's rationale, blah blah blah. Here's like get Brexit done, blah blah blah, simple and easy. But that's what people went for. Simplicity, the feels. This is about feels. This election was about vibes. Trump didn't give you an economic agenda. Not everyone, many people said they voted on the economy. Kamala Harris had a cogent 82-page economic policy booklet. Trump had an empty website and talked about tariffs. Trump went, Biden-Harris economy bad, Trump economy good, tariff good, China bad. There you go. So essentially, that's what he said. And people are like, I'm going to vote on him for the economy. Now, it doesn't matter that he doesn't seem to understand macroeconomics, because his the electorate, doesn't understand macroeconomics. How do tariffs work? Doesn't matter. I've told you we're going to hit China. It's disinformation. I'm going to give you disinformation about tariffs. You're going to believe it. The reason you're going to believe it is because all of the media sources that you get your information from are not going to challenge my claims. This is an information bubble that massages itself. And I am not held accountable, says Trump, by any of this. Occasionally, when Fox really annoys me, I claim I'm going to go and speak to Rupert Murdoch because they shouldn't be showing adverts on Fox that are critical of me. This is a propaganda information landscape that overwhelmingly benefits the Republicans. And so my point is that this victory that we have seen so overwhelmingly to the benefit of the Republicans, I think is largely as a result of the information spaces that we all existing and the power that the Republicans have over the media in the US. Rory Stewart, the former Conservative MP in the UK, said, "We can empathise with voters and accept the result, but Trump's victory does not make his programme or vision better. We were wrong to believe Kamala Harris would win. We were not wrong to believe that she should have won, or that the values and the vision that she represents can win again. So the idea that you got, oh no, the US isn't ready for a woman. Yeah, but they appear to be ready for the first convicted felon president. A man found liable for sexual abuse. 34 felony counts. That's acceptable. So this is nothing to do with, the US isn't ready. And if it is anything to do with that, it's actually, well, why does the US feel they're not ready? What they've been told about women or about Kamala Harris against Donald Trump, because on paper, she has far greater expertise at running the country than he does. She's worked in 3 branches of government, and she's done a pretty good job of doing that. And she comes in with a lot of expertise, and she, despite what Trump says, she is high IQ. She's a clever woman, and she's achieved on merit. But he sells his electorate, or the electorate, and his supporters this narrative of low IQ, DEI, lacking merit, DEI job appointments, etc., etc. And of course, this is kind of disinformation that then gets regurgitated right throughout that information space. And that's what we're going to look a little bit more into. Rachel Bidikofer here says, nothing would have changed this. So the idea that, guys, this is such a bloodbath and I don't think picking Shapiro would have changed anything. That's my point. My point exactly. Nothing would have changed this, she says. All you need to do is look at the gains he made universally to know that no tweak would have mattered. White America didn't vote for a dictator by accident. They want it. Now, my question would be, if that's the case, if her conclusion is the case, why is that? So this is getting to the bottom of what the real issues are here. Now, I've written an article and it's on Only Sky. It's a subscriber-only article at the moment, but you can read it for free. You just need to put your email in. If you're happy to subscribe to Only Sky, the good bunch of people, please come and read my article. I'd love to know what you guys think. So it's called The Triumph of the Fields, and basically, it's exactly what I'm telling you in this video, and it's kind of what Rachel Bidikofer there is saying is that no tweaking would have mattered. No tweaking would have mattered. That's generally what I'm saying. David Weigel here says, Harris doing Fox for the first time ever and trying to make a Rogan hit work showed Democrats rejecting this don't platform them theory. Too little too late, but I think never doing Fox era, which started in 2007 with Democrats rejecting Fox debate, is over. Mehdi Hassan disagrees. This gets it the wrong way round. The Dems' problem is not that they don't appear on or appease Fox or Rogan or Musk. It's that they don't have their own versions of Fox, Rogan or Musk. They suck at messaging. Hallelujah, Mehdi Hassan. That is my entire article written in 4 lines on Twitter. You are much more concise than me. Of course, my article brings all the data and the justification for these larger points. But the reason the Democrats didn't win is that they do not have an information space remotely comparable to the Republicans. Okay, here is broadly what I say. Some of these gripes, all of these kind of blame game issues may well have contributed to some degree, but the Democrats were destined not to win this election. Why? Not to completely ignore the global trend of anti-establishment, anti-incumbency, but it was disinformation, misinformation, lack of information, and information space control. So what we have here is disinformation, which is purposeful lying to people. And that can happen from Russia to people inside the US. It can happen from Elon Musk to Donald Trump. It can happen from your neighbor spreading things on Twitter to listening to Joe Rogan not challenging someone when they splurge lies on a podcast. And that can be, so disinformation is when it's done purposefully, right? Not all of that will be purposeful. So that's when you get misinformation, which is sharing of things that you don't realize are false, but you're bought into it and you share that. That becomes misinformation. It's functionally the same. Then you have a lack of information. So we're talking predominantly about low information voters. And I'm not being pejorative here. It's just simply true that most people in every country around the world, in every electorate of the world, most people are low information voters. Not everyone has either the time, the inclination, or the capacity to take on or understand all the information required to make a balanced and knowledgeable evaluation of the candidates and of the political realm and the economic domain as well, in order to vote in a way that is rationally justified. We just don't have those people. And many of those people don't want to be anything other than low information voters. They don't have the interest of spending all the time that we do, learning about politics, listening and reading. I was actually, my friend on Facebook the other day, an American, put in an absolutely stinging rebuke of American education, to the point of saying the literacy levels, and he brought all the receipts. He had all of the studies and everything, and it was pretty harsh. But it's saying, look at how many people struggle with literacy, and even college educated people struggling with basic literacy skills, and blah blah blah. It was amazing, and it's like, it just goes to show that you know, we project sometimes ourselves onto other people. Now, I come at this from an educated person who's kind of written books. I've written 5,000 articles. I spend all my time speaking, hopefully somewhat cogently, about highfalutin things on the internet. But if I project myself onto the rest of the electorate, if it was really like that, like, you know, 70 million JPs walking around the UK, you'd have a very different vote going on, right? And that's just not the case. Most people are not able to, or don't care to, or simply don't have the time to become high information voters. I was telling you anecdotes of people who were door knocking. Some people weren't even aware that the election was on the next day. They said, oh, I'm going to vote the next day. Jimmy Kimmel just did a show, right? This was 2 days after the election. He did a show, I think. And at the end of the show, they went out on the streets and they said, and they had it on camera. They're like, this is what day it is. This is Wednesday. So this is day after the election. We are going to speak to people on the street. And they're like, right, speaking to these people. So are you going to be voting today? Who do you think you're going to be voting for? And are you pleased that you're going to vote? Why are you voting, etc., etc.? And a whole host of these people they interviewed, I'm looking forward to voting, and I think it's really important that we go out and vote and all this kind of stuff. And of course, the election had taken place the day before. It was over. And there they were, speaking to a bunch of people on the streets, saying that they were going to go and vote. They didn't realise the election had been. And these were mainly young people, and they sounded fairly with it, cogent, like they kind of knew how to express themselves politically. And even voted. They hadn't voted and didn't know that the election had been and gone. You multiply that across the US, that's interesting. You're wondering how come there are up to 20 million, but probably, let's say, I don't know, let's guess at something like 12 million people missing off the data this year. Why are there 12 million fewer votes? Well, there you go. You still got people, and you could argue that was the same last time, but interestingly, it was COVID last time. People were voting from home, and there's all this talk, and we were living online, and we were being fed news and information. Now we've gone back to going out in our daily lives and getting busy and doing stuff. Before, we were all at home, being fed things through the internet, and everyone knew to vote by mail, etc., etc. And so I think that would have thrown the previous election, the 2020 election, right up, far higher in terms of voter numbers than the 2024 election. So low information voters are a challenge for any party because, well, on the one hand, they're a challenge because you want to make them high information voters so they know what you're talking about, they understand your policies and they buy into them. Or the other option, I guess, is no, it's great they're low information voters because they're not going to challenge what we say. And if we deliver them a narrative that sounds good, has the right feels, has the right vibes, then they'll sync that. They won't challenge that. They don't feel the need to look to see whether that is true or not, whether we're feeding them disinformation. And because they're low information voters, they don't have the tools, the cognitive or knowledge tools to be able to challenge these narratives, without doing some extra work around that. And I think, that is no more evident than, say, the stuff about tariffs. Now, this was an anecdote that was, I've included this in my article. I don't know the provenance of this. It could be complete nonsense. Not nonsense. It might not have actually happened. Don't know, whatever. But this anecdote is doing the rounds, right? My husband works for a small manufacturing company, and here in southwestern PA, that means most employees are Trump voters. When the president of the company sat them down today to tell them their annual Christmas bonus will not come this year because they now need to purchase at least a year's worth of products prior to January the 21st due to the proposed tariffs, they did not understand. My husband said that their president had to explain what a tariff is and how it will directly hurt their company. They all thought the foreign company paid the tariff. This is the level of ignorance voting against their own interests here in Pennsylvania, where we failed American women and children last night. So this idea that you're explaining that we're not actually going to have enough money for Christmas bonuses because we're going to have to buy in a load of extra stuff as a company, because if they put on 100, 200, 400, 500, 2,000% tariffs, which is what Trump claimed, and he says he's going to fulfill his pledges, and they're talking about tariffs already still, then actually, as a company, you're going to be hit by importing this stuff, so you need to get it in while it's cheap, and that's going to eat into your ability to pay bonuses and so on and so forth. But hang on, what are you doing? Surely China's paying for these tariffs. No, we are. We're paying for it, and then we either pass that on and to higher prices to the consumer, which is people like you for when you're going out and buying other stuff, or we sink that in our profits. Now, what happened when Trump put tariffs on some things in his previous tenure is that a lot of the industries or a lot of the companies sunk those tariffs, and it wasn't massively inflationary. But when you put tariffs right across the board, and when you do it to the tune that he's claiming, if he does do that, that will absolutely be inflationary. These aren't strategic tariffs, these are across the board tariffs. Now, the fact that people don't understand that, and even if that anecdote isn't true, you've got this brilliant David Pakman interview where he's interviewed by a podcaster who's going to vote, sounds that he's speaking to someone that's going to vote Trump, doesn't realize what tariffs are. This is a really good interview.
Trump, do you dislike his policies or him as a person or both?
I don't dislike Trump as a person in the sense that I've never met the guy. So I think he has a lot of personality traits that make him completely unsuited to being president. And also, I think his policy prescriptions, to the extent that they exist and he understands them, which is a different part of it. A lot of the stuff Trump talks about, he still doesn't know how tariffs work. We're 8 years into this thing, 9 years in. He still thinks China pays the tariffs when they're paid by American companies.
I've seen him talk about tariffs.
Very confused guy.
Wait, so China's not paying tariffs right now?
The tariffs are paid by the American companies that import the Chinese goods. That's the way it's such a fundamental, and I see you looking a little confused on this one.
Yeah, I'm confused.
This is the way tariffs work. What Trump did is place tariffs on Chinese imports. By the time the imports get here, China's been paid for the stuff. Maybe they get net 120 terms, right? But in a sense, China has already transacted. The American company who brings the goods in pays the tariffs.
Really?
You're kidding right now.
No, I thought he said he was raising the tariffs by 50 to 100% for Chinese imports.
You got to clip this. I'm begging you. You got to clip this and send it to me.
I'm genuinely
None
confused.
of this stuff is getting cut out, right?
No.
Oh, my God.
We post everything.
Please. The tariffs are paid by the company that does the importing. So if you want to build a building in the U.S. and you import Chinese steel, you pay China for the steel, you pay the U.S. government the tariff. This is why it's inflationary. economists have looked at Trump's tariff proposal and said it would make stuff more expensive for Americans by adding the cost of the tariffs to the total cost of production. So that's the way tariffs work. A lot of people don't seem to know how tariffs work, which is sad because this is how people end up getting sucked into Trump's vortex. He says something that sounds good. I'm going to punish China with tariffs.
Yeah.
In this case, that sounds good. Chinese tariffs. They're paid by the American companies.
Wow.
That's why it's so damaging.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Send me this part of the
No, I
conversation.
will. I genuinely had no idea. I thought China was paying those.
Yep. No, China's not paying them.
Yeah. I thought they were, though.
They weren't. They're not. Yeah.
So why would he do that? I'm confused.
You'd have to ask him.
That is such an amazing clip there, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's so on point. And the idea is this: make economy good, immigration bad. It's just, that's his vibes approach, which is, China bad, make China pay. That's fine. Like, as I say here, he appears to have no desire to exhibit economic knowledge to his voters, let alone be anything but carefree with his declarations. And by carefree, I mean, he literally said in an interview with Maria Bartiromo, I'll say 100, 200, I'll say 500, I don't care, as in percent of the tariffs. So if you're a business leader and you're a CEO, and you're like, well, if Trump comes in, we may have 100, 200, 500, and at another time he said 2,000%. 2,000% tariffs. I need to know whether it's a 100% tariff or 2,000% tariff, because that's going to affect my business, right? But he's carefree with his declarations. He seems to have no knowledge about how tariffs work, or he knows how they work, but is pulling the wool over the electorate's eyes if they are low information voters that aren't going to question this. Take that podcaster who's interviewing David Pakman that didn't understand that. So I thought China paid because that's what you've been told. And Trump is still saying that. This is not, he's been challenged on it and he's not clarifying it. Because, as I say here, because the feel here is protect America, China bad, make China pay. Keep it simple. The narrative is clear, but the problem is you are lying to your electorate. You are disinforming your voters, which is why I say the single most important thing, the reason why the Democrats lost was not all of these ideas that they were too far left, too far right, weren't appealing to men, women, old, young, pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, whatever. All of that, froth. This is the reason. Some of these gripes, as I said, may well have contributed to some degree, but the Democrats were destined not to win. And as I said to you before, why? Not to completely ignore the global trend of anti-establishment and anti-incumbency, but it was disinformation, misinformation, lack of information, and information space control. Looking at the top 20 podcasts on podcasts list on Spotify, we see a proliferation of right-wing shows. The top 3 are all conservatives: Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, number 1, number 2, number 3, Sean Ryan. Add to them many of the rest of the list, such as Charlie Kirk, who I think is number 5, Dan Bongino, Theo Von, Megyn Kelly, Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens. That's just the top 20, and that includes all subjects on Earth. All subjects on Earth for Spotify podcasts, and you've got that many right-wing political podcasts. Although, to be honest, Sean Ryan is a military one, but is right-wing, is conservative. So the politics does come through. So you see the podcast world has an incredibly rightward skew. Of course, we can ask whether the information space drives political thought or whether it's a reflection thereof, but the domination is clear. And I think there's a coextensive relationship actually between our political ideas individually and what we read, and then what we read drives us further. And I've written an article previously on the spiral theory that, so say for example, take my dad. He used to read the Daily Telegraph when he was in the Navy. He read the Daily Telegraph, and that was kind of, he had a sensible, moderate, conservative belief. And then he sort of, as he got older and he left the Navy, and it was like, okay, moved on to the Daily Mail. And then the Daily Mail ended up, he was kind of being driven, like Daily Telegraph went a bit even further rightward. It took him with him. it took him with it. And then he developed an even further rightward shift as the information space was talking about immigration and Brexit. And then he went on to the Daily Mail, and he went from the Daily Mail to the Daily Express. And now he has gone, I've seen his journey from here to here. And was that him driving that, or was that the media driving him? And actually, I think it's a coextensive relationship, but it's a one-way system. And you can say the same for maybe the left driving. If you get into that information space, and you can be driven to the extreme left, right? And in fact, the algorithms of Facebook have been found to drive people to extremes. The Facebook algorithms used to overtly benefit the far right, or the right. They've just recently changed their algorithms a little bit because they recognized that was a problem. But when I talk about the issues for the Democrats, or actually in this case with Labour, and I wrote an article about this years ago saying exactly what I'm saying here now, but the problems in the UK were for the British left, which was there are 9 newspaper news media sites that are right-leaning and only 2 that are left-leaning, and those readerships are tiny. And so the entire media landscape in the UK, there are no left-wing TV news shows. There's now Talk TV, and there is GB News, and the other 2 are centrist. So that skews to the right. The podcasts skew to the right, so on and so forth. So it's exactly the same problem in the UK, and I wrote about that years ago. Well, this is come home to roost in the US. So this is my thesis. The same can be said in other forms of media. So we've done podcasts. Fox News famously has a gargantuan reach compared to other cable news channels. The Sinclair broadcast group monopolizes local TV news stations to the point where newsreaders are given identical conservative scripts to convince their audiences, even though the channels may have CBS or ABC in their titles. So Sinclair has a right-wing grip on local news media. And there have been, John Oliver's done segments on this. I did a segment on this recently where I showed you the video where it had all the newsreaders from all around the US, from these local news stations, and they're all saying the same thing. And do you remember? And it mapped it, and it was almost like you've just got a crowd chanting the same thing. And it had all those same newsreaders from all the local TV stations. They were given a script by Sinclair. You have to read this, and it's MAGA scripting. Absolutely incredible. So you've got national news media, you've got local TV news media, you've got podcasts. Then there is the conservative phenomenon of American talk radio. You would be hard pressed to turn a dial of the car radio and find a liberal source of information the length and breadth of the United States. And then there is Twitter, or X, or Musk World. The South African tech bros, Elon Musk, David Sachs and Peter Thiel have their fingerprints all over the Republican campaign and are likely to form an American political oligarchy in the next administration. And that's not to mention their desire for techno-fascism. And yes, that is a thing. We now know from the Wall Street Journal analysis that X, or Twitter, amplifies conservative voices at a ratio of 2-1 over liberals for new accounts. And you can go and read the quote from the Wall Street Journal I had there. We know from leaked coding that he amplifies his own voice. This is Musk himself, not just to 200 million followers, but forcibly on accounts that don't follow him. So when I turn on Twitter every day, I get Elon Musk at the top of my feed, and I get him littered throughout my feed every day. And I had to block him in order for that not to be the case. Unless you have blocked him, every time you turn on X, his voice will be at the top of the feed. The problem here is that his voice drips with disinformation. Musk's disinformation travels faster and wider, as an NBC analysis has found. NBC News analysed more than 700 of Musk's election-related posts since July and collected by the NBC News decision desk, and found that in the cases in which he expressed suspicion about voting, sometimes pushing conspiracy theories, he received significantly more engagement, as measured by likes, comments and reposts on Twitter, than he did when he posted on other election topics. The difference in reach was vast. 5.2 times more likes, 4.2 times more comments, and 9.1 times more reposts. And this is where you're going to have Russian bots thrown in here as well, and trolls doing this work. When comparing the median election doubting post to the median election post that didn't cast doubt on the process. Indeed, another of their must-read articles is titled "How Elon Musk Turned X into a Pro-Trump Echo Chamber." Another analysis has shown that just on the subject of election integrity, the majority of Musk's posts were disinformation. Concerning his 17,000 posts from this year alone that the report looked at, the team quote, fact-checked Musk's posts on election security and found that 55% of them contain misleading or false statements or amplify posts that do. Non-profit organisation Centre for Countering Digital Hate carried yet another study which showed that Trump and far-right political narratives on all of his seemingly endless stream of tweets were viewed more than 17.1 billion times since his July endorsement of Trump. Absolutely incredible. And that works out to roughly $24 million of campaign ads for free. So in other words, that is the network of Twitter being used as a campaign propaganda tool for the right wing. So simply put, X has become a propaganda arm for the Republican Party and Donald Trump. And then you've got the Facebook issue, and then so on and so forth. You know, there are all these different parts of the media landscape that are under the control of the right wing. And this isn't just me whinging and whining. This is, well, I am whinging and whining because it's deeply asymmetrical. But the point is, the Democrats lost because they cannot message. Not that they don't have a message, although I think they can improve on the message. But they literally have no ability to communicate that message because they do not control the information spaces like the GOP do. And an example of that would be at the DNC, so the 4-day Democratic convention, where they had 7 different Republican speakers endorsing Kamala Harris in powerful speeches. Fox News never showed, they didn't show a single one of those speeches. Anything critical of Trump is not shown on Fox News. And they completely propagandize their approach to Kamala Harris, or did do. It is the propaganda arm of the Republican Party, and they know it. The Republican Party know it. So that means that if you're a low information voter that exists only in a certain information ecosystem, you are going to be fed disinformation and misinformation on an industrial scale, and you will see nothing to counteract that. Or you are just going to exist in an information space that has a lack of information. And unless you go out of your way to find that information, you are going to stay in this lack of information scenario whereby you are going to be very vulnerable to nice sounding, very easy but vague narratives, feels, vibes. Oh yeah, immigration bad, Trump good for immigration. Brilliant, job done, don't need to know anything more. Excellent. Trump's good on the economy. Excellent. Inflation's high. Now, hang on. Average wages have gone up above inflation for 18 months in a row. The US has done better with inflation than any other comparable country in the G7. Inflation is not the fault of Joe Biden. Inflation is the fault of COVID and the energy crisis and supply chain issues from COVID. Right? No, none of that is being fed to them because they are in either an ecosystem whereby they don't hear that and just hear the top line vibes, or they hear stuff that fully blames things that don't really exist on Biden or the Democrats, or they'll blame inflation on Biden, even though they'll distort the sense of inflation that people have. It's garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have the requisite knowledge, you're going to be making the wrong decisions. So this is not so much about ideas, but it's about the amplification and the distortion and amplification of those ideas. And that's what the GOP, the Republicans, are able to do. The right wing in America is supremely competent at utilizing the media landscape to distort and amplify in a way that Democrats, they can't. They can't because they don't have the tools. They don't have the ownership of the information spaces. A last example I'll give you here is that one of the most powerful adverts that had one of the greatest, had the most traction for the electorate was the immigrant prisoners getting gender reassignment surgery. So this is like all the checkboxes: trans, crime, immigrants, right? And they spent $95 million on advertising to select demographics around the US, and it actually succeeded really well. It was a very powerful ad that got people really pissed off with the Democrats and trans issues and blah, blah, blah. Do you know how many people that actually applied to? Do you know how many people have received that treatment? 2 people. 2 whole people. $95 million advert about two whole people. So it's also about distorting the emphasis or distorting the importance of something. For me, that is irrelevant. If I was an American voter, a high information voter with my background knowledge and blah, 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 even if I disagreed with that treatment, being taxpayer paid or whatever, it is essentially irrelevant. It just doesn't feature as an expenditure that I need to be worried about. Like building 3 million houses, giving a foot up for small businesses, supporting, Medicare being extended for elder care in the community. That kind of thing is way more important and way more costly, and therefore, this is a big thing that we need to talk about. But it's moving the conversation from these big ideas to simplistic, emotional, evocative ideas, and the Republicans have been amazing at that for years. So the culture wars, I've told you this 100 times, right? The culture wars are essentially always either irrelevant, non-existent, or massively overblown. War on Christmas. Really? Democrats are going to come and kill your babies and steal your guns. Really? Did they do that from 2020 to 2024? No, they didn't. So stop talking about this. Stop lying about what the Democrats are doing. So if you or would do, and what you have here is then this idea that the Democrats are all about identity politics. And I've had that discussion with my mates back here who are telling me, oh look, if they just stopped wanging on about identity politics and this and that, and I'm like, dude, did you see this campaign that just took place? You tell me how many speeches Kamala Harris made about transgender and identity politics. None. She was doing bloody rallies with Liz Cheney. Like, this party, the Democratic Party, purposefully moved to the centre. They moved to the right. And yet, the Republicans were able to still label them as this identitarian party that is concerned with stuff that's, toxic masculinity, that's all they're worried about, and this and that. It's like, no, they're trying to get away from that, but they're still labelled with that. How are they able to be labelled with that? Because if you control the information spaces, you control the narrative. And the Democrats were painted with the narrative that the Republicans wanted them to be painted with. The Republicans poisoned the Democratic well. And it sounds like whinging. No, well done in a sense. That got you guys elected after you had an objectively terrible campaign. In other words, that's freaking genius. What you've done is genius. And the Republicans have played the long game. They had spent freaking decades. Like, they didn't just start this campaign a year ago and then suddenly have control over talk radio right across the nation. They didn't just suddenly get control of Fox News and all these podcasts and Sinclair Broadcast Group and Elon Musk. This is a long game, and they've been playing it a long time. And the Democrats have absolutely failed to be able to counteract that, because they've been looking elsewhere. They've been looking at policy, which as a political party, that's what you would expect to be doing, which is we need to make sure that this policy appeals to these people, that policy appeals to these people, that policy appeals to those people. And the Republicans are going, I don't give a toss about policy, mate. You guys love transgender people. And immigrants, they're taking over the world. That's what we're going to talk about. Immigrants take over the country, they're pouring through, and transgender. And your economy sucks, and we'll make the economy amazing. How would you do that? Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how we'll make it amazing. Tariffs, 1,000,000% tariffs on everything in the world. Yeah, but surely that sucks. Yeah, but they don't know that. No one knows that. Oh, the people that do know that, they talk on these highfalutin programs over there. But most of the public, they don't know that. They'll just hear me say tariffs, we're going to make China pay. Brilliant. Do you know what we did last time? You'll love this. We said we'd build a wall and make Mexico pay. Do you know what? We're in for 4 years. Do you know how much of the wall we made Mexico pay for? No, tell me. Absolutely square root of naffle. Nothing. They didn't pay for jack. Yeah, but didn't you promise the electorate that happened? Yeah, of course we did. Yeah. Vibes. Vibes, vague vibes, or big ticket vibes. Mexico's going to pay for the wall to stop all the immigrants. Didn't do it at all. Still got elected. It's about controlling the information spaces. Another example. So talking about the kind of how transgender operations of immigrant prisoners got all that traction. So a subject that concerned 2 people created more motivation to vote than the building of 3 million houses or stimulus of small businesses or the protection of reproductive rights for women. I write, this is the importance of messaging, of amplification, of distorting importance. The idea that Donald Trump would be the right choice to support the working class is laughable when the facts are that Joe Biden, the only president in history to have done so, literally walked a picket line and bent over backwards to rescue pensions for unions like Teamsters. And yet the Teamsters union turns around and refuses to endorse the Democrats. You know, the ones that worked with unions to get stuff for working class people. If people don't know these things, they can't throw them into their election calculus in order to make the right decision. Garbage in, garbage out. It's to me, it's blindingly obvious. And so it's the long game. And I talk about this at the end. And you know, you may hate him if you're right winger, you may hate George Soros, but George Soros knows this, right? He's been a victim of disinformation for so long. What's he done? Recently, he bought a $400 million stake in 227 US radio stations. That's what the freaking Democrats need to do. Don't worry about, whoa, that policy didn't work well enough for Latino men. Oh, we didn't get Latino men enough. Load of bollocks. Don't concentrate on that. Get the foundations correct. Get the mechanisms of messaging correct. Then you have the ability to throw out your narrative, and you can work on that narrative, but keep it simple and unifying. That's my view. So let's just see. Let's just go through a couple of ideas about this. So I went through. Yeah. So here, Elie Mystal. Exactly what I've been talking about. People saying Harris should have done Joe Rogan are missing the point. That wouldn't have helped her. Liberals need to build their own Joe Rogan. Somebody who can speak to the people he speaks to without being a guy who wants to kiss ass to billionaires like Elon Musk. Get a person that's going to speak to your working class men and women of America as a massively charismatic podcast host with a huge reach. It's not getting her on Joe Rogan. It's creating an alternative Joe Rogan. That's how you win. It's not getting her on Joe Rogan. It's creating your own Joe Rogan. That's how you win. So here we have the idea that scathing statement from Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders has gone absolutely hammer and tongs. It should come as no surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. I somewhat agree, but disagree. Because even if they'd had all the right policies for those working class people, if you can't communicate them to those working class people, they'll still believe what they're being told by the media sources that are telling them that. That is contingent, that the narrative and the vibes for the working class, that you are for the American people, right? That's your message, that's your vibes. But if you don't have a way of messaging, then you don't have a message. I can shout in the woods as loud as I like, but if no one hears me, there's no sound. That old adage, right? I can have the best message in the world, but if I'm shouting it to myself in my toilet cubicle, what's the point of having that message? Bernie Sanders can have the best bloody message this side of, I don't know, message land. but he ain't got a voice. He hasn't got a message. Someone else here saying Michael Cohen, not Trump's former fixer, I love that, says, I keep seeing the argument that Democrats abandoned the white working class, but from a policy perspective, most of Biden's legislative accomplishments benefited the working class. The sad reality for Dems is that doing things simply doesn't translate into electoral benefits. That's the point. What is Trump offering the white working class other than channeling their grievances, resentments and fears? What's his policy agenda for them? Hint, it doesn't exist. The GOP's attention to the white working class is overwhelmingly symbolic. They offer nothing substantive on policy. Dems simply can't match that and also maintain their existing coalition. That's the point. They've got nothing to offer substantially. There's no substance to their policy. They're just giving these vague, overwhelmingly symbolic mantras or paying lip service to these ideas or demonizing this person or this kind of group or this idea, immigration, etc. And that vagueness can still get them elected. Dems can't answer that because they have no way of competing in the information spaces. As this person says, there's nothing Harris could have done because voters primarily care about their personal finances at the same time as being economically literate. It's kind of an unsatisfying conclusion, but here we are. In other words, I care about inflation, so I'm going to vote for Trump. I care so much about my personal finances that I'm going to have that as motivation to vote, and then vote for the person who's going to screw over those personal finances more. So putting together my desire for a better personal financial situation with my lack of knowledge of how economics and politics works, and then I vote for the wrong person. So the question is, how did I end up there? How did I end up with this lack of knowledge? Because there's nothing wrong caring about your personal finances. We should all do that. That's your right part. Being economically illiterate is your problem. And if you're fed economic disinformation, then that is an issue. Garbage in, garbage out. Okay, another anecdote. I don't know whether it's true. I have a friend, his mother is an undocumented immigrant. He admitted today that he voted for Trump due to concerns about inflation. I just don't even know what to say anymore. He's college educated, but he still thinks Trump wasn't talking about his mum. So this is in answer to Trump will begin operations to deport millions of undocumented immigrants when he starts his term, campaign press secretary Caroline Leavitt said Wednesday morning. He'll launch the largest mass deportation operation of undocumented immigrants on day one. So you've got the son of an undocumented immigrant who is voting for Trump on concerns of inflation when Trump is going to put in several things in place that are inflationary, such as tariffs and deportation migrants, and this guy's going to have his mum forcibly deported, and yet he votes for Trump. It's biting off your nose to spite your face. Now, that may or may not be true, but the general principle is something that I think is valid. Now, here's a great graph to show you how people's understanding of facts are very, very subjective. So 2016 presidential election. So this is when Trump got in the first time. And it turns out that Democrats had a really good sense of what the economy was doing. And Republicans had a very bad sense of what the economy was like in 2016. Trump took over, and look at the opinion of the economy. It went sky high for the Republicans and went down low for the Democrats. What you are going to get is in about 3 months' time, 5 months' time, Republicans are going to be saying how amazing the economy is, even though Trump's just taken over and things that get put in place takes 2 or 3 years to come to fruition. The economy is amazing right now for the Americans, comparatively speaking, against all sorts of different metrics, including some of Trump's own, such as record-breaking stock market, etc., etc. He always used to talk about that, and when it happens on the Democrats' watch, he goes a bit quiet. Now, Republicans are thinking the economy sucks, it sucks, it sucks. Trump takes over, and it's like, oh, yeah, no, the economy's really good, actually. I think the economy, why is that? it's nothing to do with economic indicators. It's to do with who's in charge and who you like. It's this subjective understanding of or subjective interpretation of factual data. And here is a fascinating bit of graph. So here we have a graph that on the x-axis, going from left to right, you have education. So you've got low education down here, high education up here. And on the y-axis, you've got income. Low income here, high income there. So in previous times, 1996, the Democrats were more attractive to people with low education and low income. So that'll be your kind of unionized working class voters. Not trying to be offensive or anything, but those sorts of people are characterized by, working class, having blue collar jobs, being less educated, and having lower income. And the Democrats appeal to them because that's your old school unionized. That's like the Labour Party in the UK. And the same things happen with Labour, which is now appealing to your middle class intellectuals, someone like myself, right? Much more attracted to Labour now than Conservatives, whereas maybe 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that would have been very different. Same as happened in the UK has happened in the US. So this is what's happened over time, is that you went Bill Clinton, then it went all over the shop. And then in 2012, interestingly, even lower income appeal to Obama. So lots of people probably on welfare, also unionized jobs, but starting to get more educated as well. The kind of basic appeal. And then it's gone up in towards the top right. In 2016, Hillary Clinton, Biden, and then Harris up here, they've lost the appeal to the working class, and they now appeal to much higher earners that are much more educated. Higher earning, more educated people is where Harris is at. Now, but that used to be where the Republicans are at. Like, Wall Street people, CEOs that are college educated, earning loads of money, people working on Wall Street, people working in marketing or I don't know, whatever. Those kind of, that kind of appeal. Right, Bob Dole back in 1996, slap bang in the middle of high education, high income. Then Romney went even higher income, lower education. And then it's kind of gone down and down and down. And then Trump in 2016, Trump in 2020, Trump in 2024 has taken the Republican Party firmly into the working class. So you've got all sorts of, Latino, black, white working class being more and more attracted to Trump. Partly, I think, due to anti-establishment, anti-elite, because it's not the policy. If you look at his actual policies, this to me is a sign of being able to manipulate the electorate with narratives, selling them a narrative that isn't backed up by actual policy-based evidence. Evidence-based policy. No, policy-based evidence. So Trump's tax cuts in 2018 were not good for the working class. They were good for the rich, educated people up here. Whoop-de-doo. But he's appealing down here. So he's done this magic thing where he's like, I'm going to get the people to vote for me who will least benefit from me being in charge. That's what Trump's done. How has he done that? He's had the entire framework of the media landscape working on behalf of him to perpetuate this false narrative, to manipulate the vulnerable, the low information voter. Yeah, I think it's absolutely incredible. So the last thing I'm going to share with you is this. This is absolutely incredible, in my opinion. These pictures we're going to look at. But first of all, Brian Tyler Cohen. This is my entire thesis summed up here. A note to Dem politicians and campaigns. You won't persuade voters with a one-off appearance on a popular podcast a week before the election, which is not a knock on Harris's campaign. She only had a couple of months, so they did all they could. The reason Republicans are winning over so many young people is because the right invests hours and hours, every day, every month, every year in audience building among its influencer class. We can't compete by sticking our candidates on an episode one time in October of an election year. Democrats need to embrace year-round progressive media, either directly political or political adjacent, if we want to compete. But you cannot only remember independent media outlets exist 2 weeks before an election, not in a media environment where the vast majority of Americans and practically all persuadable Americans are consuming content on alternative outlets. He's absolutely right. Now, he's going to gain from this because he is an alternative media. He'll come up in this infographic we're just about to look at. So he's appealing to the Democrats to embrace him and others like him. You know, your Pondering Politics, your Luke Beasley's, your Adam Mockler, your Midas Touch, your Brian Tyler Cohen. These kind of people who are your antidote to your Joe Rogans and etc., etc. But don't start coming on my show, he's saying, 2 weeks before the frickin' election. And I listened to him the other day and he was saying, I struggle to get people to come on my show, and he's got huge reach. Sometimes it takes me forever and ever and ever, and eventually I get them coming on. They should be itching to get on, to throw. All Democratic politicians should be itching to get on any freaking podcast they can, over and over. Throw themselves out into the world. Utilize the messaging, the megaphones of the internet, of podcasts, of radios, of TV. TV is going to become less and less important. Fox News, as powerful as that is, will become less and less important. Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk, they are the new Fox News. The left, the centre, Democrats have to take that on board and compete. So this is what Brendan Friedman says in response. Brian is correct. And if you don't believe it, check out these 3 images. Look at the first, then look at the second, then make sure you really see the third to compare. It will change how you think about influencers on the left and right. So this is from Wired, they're a tech media outlet. So these are left-wing influencers, and the size of the circle gives you their influence, like the amount of subscribers, viewers, whatever. Now, what's interesting here is the biggest one is Carlos Eduardo Espina. Never heard of him. I presume a Latino left-wing influencer. Geoff Helgott. Never heard of him. John Cooper. I've occasionally shared some things of his from Twitter, but don't know who the hell he is. And then some of these, I just haven't heard. Heather Cox Richardson, I know a little bit. Walter Masterson, never heard of. Harry Sisson, might have heard that name. Brian Tyler Cohen, I watch him. Hassan Piker, I only first heard of about 3 weeks ago and shared one of his videos. Interviews on Pod Save America. Absolutely incredible that all of these, the biggest left-wing influencers, I don't know. And probably most of you won't either. Now let's go to the big right-wing influencers. Elon Musk. Look how freaking massive he is. So why do I keep speaking about him all the time? Because of his reach. Logan Paul, Ben Shapiro, Andrew Tate. My boys talk about Logan Paul and Andrew Tate and Jake Paul, for God's sake. Tucker Carlson. And then some people I don't know. Let's look at some of these small. Tim Pool, I know. Charlie Kirk. Candace Owens. These are tiny circles, and yet these ones are bigger than all of those left-wing ones I was just talking about. Literally all of them are bigger. Candace Owens has a podcast that's bigger than Brian Tyler Cohen. Brian Tyler Cohen was one of the bigger circles that we just looked at. And this is a tiny circle. Jackson Hinkle. Benny Johnson. All of these people that I talk about. Jack Posobiec. Stephen Crowder. I've heard of most all of these people here. Right? Now let's compare them. And there you go. So when I'm talking about the ability for the left to compete with the right, that's what I'm talking about. And that's just on the internet. That's not Fox News. That's not talk radio. That's not local TV. These are podcasters only. Or you can throw Elon Musk in as a man that owns an entire platform and he employed Tucker Carlson. So, you know, he's like the Uber version of these people. You know, you've got Logan Paul is bigger than the biggest left-wing influencer. It's just incredible. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So Adam Kinzinger, everyone keep your heads up, this isn't forever, and after America gets a taste of what it voted for, there will likely be a massive backlash. There'll be lots of time to come, and I'm still in the trenches with you, just going to take a bit longer. But it has to be more planned than that. There has to be a plan afoot to compete in the information spaces. If you can't get blue circles as big as those red circles, you will lose again, and you will keep losing. So when George Soros is spending 400 million spondoolies buying stakes in radio stations, he's got the right frickin' idea. You can spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a get out the vote campaign for the last 2 weeks of an election campaign, and it might shift swing state voters by a few percent, or it might not allow the leak by as many percent as it happened elsewhere. But if you took that money and 4 years before an election, you piled that into podcasters and YouTubers and radio stations and TV stations, etc., etc., then you get circles this big. People need to stop worrying about the blame game of why the Democrats lost. They can't. I see it now, and I didn't see it. I talked about this, but I didn't think it would have this much effect. But the reality is, no Democrat would have won. No Democrat, especially with Biden only giving up 107 days before the election. If you'd had 2 years to prepare, maybe. So if you're going to blame anyone, blame Biden for not giving up earlier. But Kamala Harris did the best she could and ran a pretty good campaign. And Donald Trump's campaign was objectively terrible. And he still won. And he won because he's got big red circles. Big old red circles. And that is why the Democrats lost. They need to do something about that. Thanks for listening. And just as I was rendering this video, I came across this infographic, which I think is so important because it pretty much sums up what I've been saying. Misinformed views on immigration, crime, the economy are correlated with ballot choice. So when asked these questions, this is from Ipsos Week in Review. Violent crime rates are at or near all-time highs in most major American cities, which is false. The Republicans mainly got that not correct, and Democrats got that hugely correct. Inflation in the US has declined over the last year and is near historic averages, which is true. Republicans got that wrong. Democrats got that largely correct. Hugely correct. The US stock market is at or near all-time highs, which is true. Again, the same tracking there. Over the last few months, unauthorized border crossings in the US-Mexico border are at or near the lowest level in the last few years, which is true. And again, Democrats plus 59, Republicans plus 17. For the wrong way, Republicans the right way for Democrats, which is correct, plus 59 for Democrats. So this is, I think, very important. It shows what I'm talking about, which is disinformation is, a lack of understanding of what is going on in the US, distorted opinions, distorted evaluations of the state of play in America for all sorts of different things: crime, immigration, the economy, so on and so forth. It appears that one side has a better grasp of the reality. But reality and perception are two very different things. And if you can harness vibes, then perception is all that matters. Reality, the fundamentals that underpin reality, are irrelevant. And if you have the megaphone to perpetuate the disinformation, distort reality, to create those perceptions, to create that narrative, if you have those tools, you win the election.